In the gospel reading we've just heard, Jesus begins his mission. And that mission he carries out in an infected society. Here is how one modern writer describes that sullen corner of the Roman Empire. Think about the similarities and the differences compared with us now. This, he writes, is not how the world is supposed to be. The empire and its filthy gods encroach. The empire's money, with its blasphemous pictures, has to be used for buying innocent, ordinary bread. It is as if the people are being kept forcibly dirty all the time. The province simmers. Low-level terrorism flourishes. Preachers and would-be prophets are everywhere, prominent for a season and then gone. Some say you should abandon everything and go into the clean desert. Some say you need to be washed in the province's one river. A lot of people think the world will end soon, fear it will end soon, hope it will end soon, because then a more than human justice may put things right. Into all this comes Jesus. He is washed in the river. He does spiritual quarantine in the desert. Then he begins his mission to proclaim good news, the arrival of what he calls God's kingdom. Here, in the Empire of Rome, a Galilean peasant announces the Empire of God. Nowadays, if you are to claim the name of Christian, whatever it is you do, whether it's choral evensong or pasting up the end is nigh posters in railway stations, whatever you do has to bear some resemblance to that mission of Jesus. And since 1996, the Church of England has been using the 5 marks of mission to help churches to see how they measure up. The 5 marks are to proclaim the good news of the kingdom, to teach, baptize and nurture new believers, to respond to human need by loving service, to seek to transform unjust structures of society, and number 5, to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation. Or, more pithily, tell, teach, tend, transform, treasure. We're going to look at 1 mark each week in our summer sermons for the rest of this month and a little beyond. It is a very Jesus list. Today, we hear Jesus proclaim the kingdom. That's mark number 1. In the next verse after our reading, Jesus begins mark 2, calling people to join his mission, and then mark 3, as he responds to human need by healing the sick. Turn to Matthew's Gospel, and you'll hear Jesus calling out injustice in the Sermon on the Mount, mark number 4. As for mark 5, you won't hear Jesus warning about climate breakdown, but you will often find him using word pictures from the natural world to show how God works among us. There's a hint there that the earth is not just a commodity to be exploited, but sacred space in which to know and obey God. But today, mark number 1, tell, proclaim the good news of the kingdom. And Jesus' good news is that although the world isn't as it should be, God has got involved in that world. And the other marks of mission all flow from that. It is only because of God's active presence among us that the church has anything to say or anything to do, or indeed any reason to exist. And as you and I hear Jesus' proclamation, we too are in an infected society. We're not oppressed by a foreign power. Rather, it is creation itself that is oppressing us, though perhaps with some human help. But, like the Roman occupation, the pandemic oppresses some more than others. 10 days ago, the pilgrims of the Young Christian Climate Network arrived in Salisbury on their way to November's UN conference on the climate in Glasgow. What they say about the effects of climate breakdown is also true of the pandemic. We are all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. Some vessels are proving better than others at weathering the pandemic storm. Listen to the theologian Katie Cross. In an article called Fragments from Within the Pandemic, she describes a phone call with her atheist father. "You know what this pandemic is?" he asks me. Rhetorically, of course, he's about to tell me. I don't believe in God, but it's the universe, Mother Nature, whatever you want to call it, forcing us to think about how we've hurt each other, how we've hurt the world. This is a reckoning, it's a punishment. She goes on, "Maybe," I press, "but why are some people suffering more than others? Why are people of colour, poor people, immigrants and disabled people suffering the most?" He's silent for a moment. "I don't know, but that's part of your job, isn't it, to think about that?" After we hang up, I stare out of the window and don't move much or speak for the best part of an hour. Proclaiming the good news of the kingdom has to begin here with the virus. What can we say? Anything we do say, because we're still somewhat in the middle of it, is bound to be inadequate. But we cannot say nothing. When would-be prophets, like the atheist dad, are reaching for religious language, we cannot duck the conversation. So here are 3 inadequate thoughts that occur to me about proclaiming the good news in a time of pestilence. First, we may need to begin not with words of obvious good news at all, but with words of lament. There is no good news to be had by ignoring the bad. In conversations during these seasons of lost health, lost livelihoods, lost lives, you and I can dare to use the language of grief that others shy away from. We can, for instance, talk about someone's death rather than their passing. We can tell the truth. Lament, acknowledging that this is not how the world is really supposed to be, is part of proclaiming God's kingdom, like Jesus weeping at the tomb of Lazarus, his friend. Second, like Katie Cross after her phone call to her dad, we may need to pause. We need space to look around and to ask, where is the good news? Are there any signs of God's active presence among us? There is space in this service to do just that. And if the inkling of an answer comes to you, what then? Well, there is coffee after the service. That is a cup full of caffeinated good news right there. And it's a good opportunity to catch up, and also perhaps an opportunity to compare notes if any inklings of an answer have come to you. And that's the third thing we can do. We need to tell. we need to talk about this stuff. And it really is we. When the atheist dad says, that's part of your job, isn't it? It is your job as well as mine to think and to talk about these things. Proclaiming the good news of the kingdom is okay in the ritualized context of a sermon, but it carries much more weight in conversation. Telling the good news, though, does not mean giving a comprehensive account of God, the virus, and the future of church and planet. It's more a case of saying, you know, I see real hope in this, or I'm really encouraged by that. Wherever it is that you catch a glimpse of the kingdom, somewhere where faith is being nurtured, or need is met with love, where power is being challenged truthfully, or creation is being cared for. Wherever you see marks of the active presence of God. Jesus, in his parables of the kingdom, does something similar. What's the kingdom of God like, he asks? Rhetorically, of course, he's about to tell us. It's like seed growing. It's like yeast in bread. It's like blowing all your cash on a gorgeous necklace, or wherever you want to put your pearl of great price. You might call this fragmented speech, not a comprehensive lecture on the Creator's complex relationship with the creation, but a single image, a phrase that doesn't explain the world, but teases you into seeing how God is there and at work in it. And those are fragments of speech that you or I may be given to say. Here and now, there are fragments of God's future scattered in our present. And God has given us eyes to see them and lips that we might tell.